September 17th, 1944. The shattered fields outside Arnhem, Netherlands. Dawn's grey light filtered through a relentless drizzle, turning the already sodden earth into a quagmire that sucked at every boot and wheel. You could hear it first, the low rumble of engines straining against the muck, the splash of tires spinning uselessly, the distant crack of rifles echoing like accusations across the flat, flooded landscape. Operation Market Garden was in its frantic early hours, and the men of the British 1st Airborne Division were dropping into hell. Sergeant Tom Ellis crouched low behind a splintered hedgerow, his Sten gun clutched tight, the cold metal slick with moisture. His face was smeared with camo paint, but the rain had long since washed it into muddy streaks that matched the filth caking his battle dress. Around him, paratroopers from the 2nd Battalion huddled in foxholes that were more puddle than protection, their red berets sodden and useless against the chill. The air smelled of wet wool, cordite, and the metallic tang of fear. Radios crackled faintly, voices from Brigade HQ barking updates. Snipers reported in the woods to the east. Hold the bridge at all costs. Ellis wiped rain from his eyes and peered through the haze. The drop zones had been a disaster. Too far from the target, gliders crashing into trees, jeeps bogged down before they could move. Now, as the sun struggled to rise, the real enemy stirred. German snipers, those ghost-like killers from the Fallschirmjäger or SS units, had taken positions in the scattered farmhouses and tree lines. They weren't the frantic Wehrmacht conscripts. These were professionals, armed with Karabiner 98K rifles, scoped with ZER 39 sights, picking off officers and radio men with surgical precision. One shot from a Mauser could end a man's dreams before breakfast. "Keep your heads down, lads," Ellis muttered, his voice barely cutting through the patter of rain on leaves. Private Jenkins, a wiry kid from Manchester barely out of his teens, nodded shakily, fumbling with the Bren light machine gun's bipod. It was stuck in the mud again, the ground so soft it threatened to swallow the whole weapon. Explosions rumbled in the distance, Allied artillery from across the Rhine, but too far to help here. The Germans had the high ground, or what passed for it, in this drowned polderland. Suddenly, a sharp whistle sliced the air, followed by the unmistakable phut of a suppressed shot. Jenkins jerked back, a red bloom erupting from his shoulder. "Bloody hell!" he gasped, clutching the wound as blood mixed with the rainwater pooling in his lap. Ellis lunged forward, dragging him deeper into the ditch. "Medic! We need a medic over here!" But the call was drowned out by another crack, closer this time. A bullet thunked into the earth inches from Ellis's helmet, sending wet clods spraying across his face. The snipers were everywhere, invisible predators who knew the terrain like their own veins. Intelligence briefs back in England had warned of them. Elite marksmen trained in the Russian front's brutal winters now turned loose on the Western Front. They didn't charge. They waited, patient as death, using the fog and foliage to mask their nests. One had already taken out Lieutenant Hargrove during the drop, his body tumbling limp from the sky like a broken puppet. Now, with the airborne troops scattered and pinned, every advance felt like walking into a slaughterhouse. Ellis pressed his back against the slippery bank, heart pounding. You could feel it in your bones, the way the mud clung, weighing you down, making every movement a betrayal. The Germans exploited it masterfully, their snipers elevated on makeshift perches, scopes cutting through the mist to find silhouettes against the horizon. "We can't stay here," Ellis hissed to Corporal Davies, who was bandaging Jenkins with strips torn from his own shirt. "They'll pick us off one by one. We need to push to the rendezvous point, link up with the glider pilot regiment." Davies shook his head, rain dripping from his bushy mustache. "Sergeant, it's suicide. That last shot came from the windmill tower over 400 yards. Fritz has the range." He was right. The snipers' 98Ks with their 7 92mm rounds could punch through at 500 meters, and in this flat country there was no cover that lasted. The mud only made it worse. Vehicles from the 1st Air Landing Brigade were mired half a mile back, their universal carriers belching smoke as drivers revved futilely. As the morning wore on, the tension coiled tighter. Distant gunfire popped like fireworks, but here it was intimate. The wait between shots, the rustle of wind in the willows that might be a German shifting position. Ellis scanned the tree line through his binoculars, the lenses fogged despite his efforts. There, a glint, maybe a scope reflecting the weak light. He squeezed off a burst from his Sten, the 9mm rounds chopping into the branches, but it was futile. The sniper answered with a deliberate crack, and Private O'Leary slumped forward, his eyes wide in surprise, a neat hole through his forehead. "Damn them!" Ellis growled, slamming his fist into the mud. The division's objective was clear. Seize the Arnhem Road Bridge, hold it for the ground forces racing up from the south, but without mobility, without suppressing those snipers, they were sitting ducks. Radios sputtered with pleas for air support, but the skies were claimed by Luftwaffe flak and the unrelenting Dutch weather. In the chaos of the drop, plans had frayed. Now survival hinged on improvisation. By midday, as the rain eased to a miserable mist, Ellis gathered his squad, what was left of it, in a ruined barn, the scent of rotting hay mingling with gun oil. 5 men, faces gaunt, weapons crusted with dirt. "We can't let them dictate the fight," he said, voice steady despite the knot in his gut. Jenkins groaned from his corner, morphine dulling the pain. The snipers had already claimed a dozen from the battalion, turning heroes into statistics. But in the mud-choked fields, an idea flickered, something simple, born of desperation, that might just turn the tide. If you want to hear how they pulled it off amid the growing storm of battle, stick around. And if these stories of grit and ingenuity pull you in, hit that subscribe button and give it a like. We've got more coming. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, the first whispers of the plan spread, a stupid trick that no one in the high command would have approved. But out here, with death whispering from every vantage, it was all they had. The barn's timbers creaked under the weight of the wind, a low moan that blended with the groans of the wounded. Sergeant Tom Ellis knelt in the dim light, filtering through cracks in the walls, his fingers tracing patterns in the damp hay as he sketched his idea on a scrap of map paper. The air was thick with the stench of mildew and fresh blood, Jenkins's laboured breathing a ragged counterpoint to the muffled pops of small arms fire outside. Corporal Davies leaned in, his eyes narrowing at the crude drawing, a series of squiggles representing the flooded pastures leading to the sniper's nest in the windmill. "It's daft, Sarge," Davies whispered, rubbing mud from his palms onto his trousers. "But bloody hell, it might work. Better than waiting for another Fritz to line up his shot." The squad nodded, their faces etched with exhaustion, the kind that came from hours of impotence against an unseen foe. Private Wilkins, a lanky Scot with a scar across his cheek from North Africa, clutched his No. 4 Lee Enfield rifle like a talisman. "Aye, let's give the bastards something to chew on." The plan was born from the mud itself, that cursed slurry which had bogged down tanks and men alike since the drop. Ellis had seen it in the fields, how the relentless rain turned the polders into a mirror of grey-brown soup, swallowing outlines and turning every step into a vanishing act. The German snipers, perched high in their towers and lofts, relied on spotting movement, the bob of a helmet, the flash of a bayonet against the flat horizon. But if you became one with the muck, if you used it not as a hindrance but as a weapon, it was stupid, reckless, the sort of ploy that would get you court-martialed in training manuals back at Aldershot. Out here, though, with the Arnhem Bridge slipping further from grasp, stupid was survival. "Right," Ellis said, his voice low and urgent. "We don't charge. We don't pop up like targets at the fair. We crawl, we smear, we become the bloody field. He gestured to the open doorway where the mist hung like a shroud over the pastures. The windmill loomed half a mile off, its sails creaking lazily, a silhouette against the overcast sky. Intelligence from a captured Fallschirmjäger had pinpointed 2 snipers there, veterans of Crete and Sicily, armed with scoped Mausers and enough patience to wait out a blizzard. They'd already dropped 3 more from the battalion that afternoon, a radio operator mid-transmission, a runner carrying ammo crates, even the battalion's pet dog that had wandered too close to the tree line. You could imagine it from their vantage, the world below a chessboard of vulnerabilities. Every ripple in the mud, a potential kill. But Ellis's trick flipped the board. First, they stripped off anything reflective, watch crystals dulled with dirt, badges tucked away. Then the mud bath, scooping handfuls of the cold, viscous sludge from the barn's floor. They slathered it over their uniforms, faces, even their weapons. The Sten guns and Brens took on a matte coat, the metal vanishing under layers of earthy camouflage. Helmets were next, the ridged bowls caked until they blended with the soil. It itched like the devil, the chill seeping into skin, but it worked. In the fading light, a man testing it outside dissolved into the landscape, just another lump in the quagmire. "Test it," Ellis ordered. Wilkins low-crawled out 10 yards, belly to the ground, using his elbows and knees to propel through the slop. The mud sucked at him, each inch a battle, but from the barn door, he was gone, swallowed whole. No silhouette, no giveaway gleam. A test shot from Davies's rifle whistled harmlessly overhead, and Wilkins slithered back, grinning through the grime, like a fish in the drink, Sarge. As dusk crept in, the squad moved out in pairs, hugging the ditches that webbed the fields like veins. The rain had picked up again, a fine sheet that blurred the edges of everything, turning the world soft and indistinct. Ellis led with Davies, their Piat anti-tank projector slung awkwardly across backs, more for morale than use against snipers. The mud was deeper here, ankles sucking in the low spots, forcing them to wallow like hogs. Every few yards, Ellis froze at a sound. A twig snap, the distant whine of a motorcycle from the German lines. But it was just the wind, or a rat fleeing the flood. Halfway to the windmill, the first challenge hit. A sniper's shot cracked the air, close enough to feel the pressure wave, splintering a fence post 20 feet ahead. They flattened, hearts hammering, the mud cool against cheeks. "He's watching," Davies breathed, his moustache twitching, but the shot hadn't found flesh. The sniper had fired at a ripple, their disturbance in the water. Ellis signaled, "Slow it down." They waited, letting the rain erase their trail, then inched forward again, using tufts of grass as handholds. The trick's genius was its simplicity. No tech, no grand strategy, just the land's own filth turned ally. Further on, they linked with another squad from the 7th King's Own Scottish borderers, their lieutenant, a fresh-faced Oxford grad named Hargreaves, who eyed the mud-caked paratroopers like they'd lost their minds. "What's this, then? A beauty treatment?" Ellis briefed him quick, voice hushed over the patter of drops. Hargreaves's men had lost 4 to the same nest, including their sergeant to a headshot through a window slit. Desperation bridged the rivalry. They pooled resources, extra grenades from the glider pilot regiment boys, who were holed up nearby with their crashed Horsa gliders half submerged. The combined group, 18 men now, a ragged phalanx of mud, advanced in a staggered line, crawling through the night. The windmill grew larger, its base shrouded in fog, the faint glow of a lantern betraying life inside. German voices drifted faintly, guttural commands mixed with laughter, oblivious to the creeping tide below. Ellis's mind raced. One wrong twitch and the scopes would find them. But the mud hid the tells, the shine of sweat, the outline of limbs. It was working. No more shots came their way, the snipers scanning empty fields while the Allies closed the noose. By midnight they reached the base of the structure, the stone walls slick and cold. The air hummed with tension, the scent of wet stone and gunpowder sharp. Ellis peered up, spotting the glint of a rifle barrel in the slatted window. Davies prepped a Mills bomb, its pin ready. "On my mark," Ellis whispered. The squad fanned out, using the mud to mask their breaths, the chill numbing fingers but sharpening focus. One sniper coughed above, a human sound amid the mechanical killers, and in that moment, the trick revealed its full folly and brilliance. These ghosts of the battlefield, who struck from afar, were blind to the earth rising against them. A muffled curse from the tower. Perhaps they'd spotted a shadow too late. Ellis nodded, and the world erupted in controlled chaos, the mud's secret unleashing hell from below. But as the first grenade arced through the night, a new threat stirred from the east. The rumble of half-tracks, German reinforcements probing the flanks. The bridge waited, but so did the counterattack. The grenade sailed true, a dark blur against the night sky, vanishing through the slatted window with a dull clunk. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, thick, expectant, broken only by the drip of rain from the windmill's eaves and the laboured breaths of the mud-smeared attackers below. Then, the world inside the tower shattered. A flash of orange lit the cracks in the stone, followed by the boom that rattled teeth and sent shards of wood exploding outward. Shouts erupted in German, frantic and raw, as the snipers scrambled, their elevated perch turning from sanctuary to trap. Sergeant Tom Ellis surged forward first, his boots sinking into the muck at the base of the structure, the cold slurry splashing up to his knees. You could taste the adrenaline now, sharp and metallic, mixing with the earthy reek of the flooded ground. The squad followed in a low rush, weapons raised, their mud-caked forms blending even in motion with the shadowed earth. Corporal Davies lobbed a second Mills bomb through the lower door, the pin pinging free as it flew. It detonated inside with a muffled roar, coughing smoke and screams into the night. Private Wilkins, his Lee Enfield at the ready, kicked in the splintered door, the wood giving way like wet cardboard. Inside, chaos greeted them. The narrow stairwell twisted upward, lit by the flickering lantern that had betrayed the Germans. One sniper lay crumpled at the bottom, his carabiner 98K rifle twisted beside him, scope shattered, uniform torn by shrapnel. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, a young face frozen in surprise, perhaps no older than Jenkins back at the barn. The other tumbled down the stairs, clutching a bloody arm, his ZF-39 sight dangling from his belt like a broken necklace. He fired wildly, the 7. 92mm round ricocheting off the stone walls with a whine that set ears ringing. Ellis dropped him with a burst from the Sten, the submachine gun's chatter brief and final, bullets stitching across the man's chest. "Clear!" Ellis barked, voice echoing in the confined space. The squad fanned out, securing the ground floor amid the acrid smoke. Hargreaves's men from the borderers poured in behind, their faces streaked with the same filthy camouflage, rifles sweeping corners. No more shots came from above. The grenades had done their work, collapsing part of the upper platform in a cascade of debris. Up there, tangled in the sail's ropes, the second sniper hung limp, his body riddled with fragments. The windmills groaned now a dirge for the dead. But victory tasted like ash. As they dragged the bodies down, rifling through pouches for maps and ammo, finding a half-eaten sausage and a photo of a Fräulein tucked in one tunic, the distant rumble grew louder. Half-tracks, those squat KFZ 251s with their armoured hulls and mounted MG-42 machine guns, were churning through the mud from the east, headlights cutting foggy swathes across the fields. The Germans were probing, reinforced by a company from the 9th SS Panzer Division, their black uniforms hidden in the dark, but engines betraying their approach. Radios in the windmill crackled to life, seized from the snipers. urgent chatter in clipped German, calling for artillery support on the airborne positions. "They're coming for the bridge," Hargreaves muttered, wiping blood from his bayonet. His Oxford polish had cracked under the night's strain, voice hoarse from shouting orders. The windmill gave them a vantage now. Climbing the intact stairs, they could see the Arnhem Road Bridge in the distance, a dark span over the Rhine, flickering with muzzle flashes from the ongoing fight. The first airborne's gliders dotted the landscape like broken birds, some burning, others half sunk in the polders. But the mud trick had bought them this perch. Without it, the crawl would have ended in a hail of scoped fire, bodies bloating in the ditches. Ellis keyed a captured radio, mimicking the dead sniper's accent as best he could. Picked up from POW interrogations in training. "Find contact neutralisiert, Position sichert," he rasped, buying time. The response was garbled, but it worked. The half-tracks veered slightly, buying minutes. Down below, the squad worked fast. Rigging explosives from scavenged satchel charges, they booby-trapped the approaches to the windmill, wires stretched taut in the mud to trip unwary boots. Wilkins smeared fresh mud over the bloodstains, erasing signs of the assault, while Davies hauled the snipers' rifles to the roof, turning the scopes on the incoming threat. The first half-track hit the wire at 300 yards, its front wheel snagging the line with a snap that echoed like a rifle shot. The vehicle lurched, bogging in the soft ground, its crew spilling out in confusion. 6 SS men in Panzerfaustarm fury, scanning the dark. The MG-42 opened up, tracers arcing wildly, stitching the fields but missing the low profiles hunkered in the mud. Ellis squeezed the trigger on the captured 98K. The rifle's recoil familiar despite the grime, dropping the gunner with a headshot that spun him like a top. From the flanks, the borderers' Brens chattered, 303 rounds chewing through the half-track's thin armor, igniting the fuel with a whoosh that lit the night. Panic rippled through the Germans. Another vehicle slewed to a halt, its commander bellowing orders, but the mud betrayed them, tires spinning futilely, men wading out only to sink to their thighs. The trick extended beyond the crawl. Now the entire field became a death trap, the quagmire slowing their advance while the Allies, one with the earth, picked them off. You felt it in the air, that shift from prey to predator, the snipers' former masters reduced to silhouettes against their own engine glow. Grenades flew from the windmill, arcing into the bogged convoy, blasts sending geysers of muck skyward. By 0200 hours, the probe faltered. 3 half-tracks smoked wrecks, their crews scattered or still. The survivors retreating east toward Oosterbeek, where the main German lines hardened. Ellis's squad tallied 8 kills, no losses. The mud's embrace had shielded them, turning the Germans' precision against their mobility. But the cost lingered. Jenkins's wound festered in the barn, and word came via runner that the bridge fight intensified. XXX Corps' tanks mired miles south, delayed by the same cursed weather. As dawn's first pallor grayed the horizon, Ellis surveyed the carnage from the windmill's sails, the Rhine a silver thread in the distance. The trick had worked here, neutralizing the ghosts, but whispers from patrols spoke of more snipers massing, veterans from the Hermann Göring division, redeployed to choke the airborne corridor. The division's hold thinned, supplies airdropped into German guns, paratroopers cut off. Yet in this small victory, a spark endured. The stupid ploy spreading by word of mouth, squads across the perimeter adopting the mud mantle. Radio traffic buzzed with urgency. "All units, consolidate on perimeter. Expect heavy counter." Ellis shouldered his Sten, the barrel still caked, and led the men back into the fields. The bridge called, but the mud would carry them closer, one filthy inch at a time. Farther east, though, a larger storm brewed, panzers rumbling awake, ready to swallow the gambit whole. The first rays of dawn clawed over the horizon, painting the Dutch polders in a sickly pallor that did little to warm the bone chill seeping through Sergeant Tom Ellis's mud-crusted uniform. From the windmill's sagging roof, he watched the Rhine's lazy curve, the Arnhem Bridge a hazy silhouette 2 miles north, where flashes of gunfire stuttered like a faltering heartbeat. The air hung heavy with the acrid bite of burning fuel from the wrecked half-tracks, their twisted hulks smouldering in the fields below, sending tendrils of black smoke curling into the mist. You could hear it still, the distant groan of engines, not allied this time, but the deeper rumble of something heavier, armored, probing from the east. Panzers, likely from the 10th SS Panzer Division, their tracks churning the quagmire into froth as they mustered for a dawn push. Ellis slid down the creaking stairs, his Sten gun slung low, the weapon's weight a familiar anchor amid the exhaustion gnawing at his limbs. The squad gathered in the windmill's base, faces gaunt under layers of drying mud that cracked like old leather with every expression. Corporal Davies nursed a shallow gash on his forearm from the melee, wrapping it with a strip of captured German bandage, while Private Wilkins cleaned the seized Carabiner 98K with a rag dipped in rainwater. Hargreaves's borderers milled about, sharing smokes and low murmurs, their Oxford lieutenant scribbling notes on a blood-smeared pad, reporting the kill to battalion via a jury-rigged radio that hissed static more than clarity. "Word spreading," Hargreaves said, glancing up as Ellis entered. His voice carried the clipped edge of a man who'd seen too much too fast, the polish of command fraying into raw resolve. "Runners from the 7th Battalion say other squads heard about the crawl. They're trying it on the tree-line snipers near Wolfhees, smearing up and low-crawling with number 69 grenades ready." Ellis nodded, sinking onto a splintered crate, the wood groaning under him. The trick was no secret now. In the night's frenzy, whispers had flown like bullets, passed from foxhole to glider crash site, a desperate gospel born of the mud's unforgiving grip. Back at the barn, Jenkins had been stabilized by a medic from the 16th Medical Company, his shoulder bound tight, but the infection loomed like a shadow. Outside, the field stirred with activity. Paratroopers from the 1st Parachute Brigade emerged from their hides, tentative at first, scooping the sludge to cloak themselves before inching toward objectives. No grand charges, just this filthy metamorphosis, turning men into ambulatory earth. A test group from the glider pilot regiment, those tough birds grounded with their wrecked horses, demonstrated it to a cluster of wide-eyed replacements. Strip the shine, slather the skin, crawl like worms. One pilot, Captain Reynolds, a veteran of the Sicily drops, led by example, his face a mask of brown-grey. He vanished into a ditch 50 yards out, reappearing only when he whistled. "See, Fritz's scopes hunt shapes, not smears," he grunted, shaking off clods. The replacements followed, their initial hesitation dissolving into grim determination as a sniper's crack echoed harmlessly overhead, the bullet ploughing into empty mud. But the Germans adapted, their ruthlessness a mirror to the Allies' ingenuity. From the east, spotter teams in Kubelwagens splashed through shallower paths, their binoculars sweeping the flats. Intelligence pieced from the dead snipers' maps showed it. The 9th SS, coordinating with Fallschirmjäger remnants, deploying spotters to flush out the mudrats, as one captured note derisively called them. Mortar fire began to pepper the fields, 80mm rounds from Nebelwerfers arcing in, exploding with whistles that shredded the silence. One blast caught a crawling squad from the 2nd South Staffordshires, 200 yards south, sending geysers of muck and screams skyward. Ellis heard the radio call. 3 down, the mud no shield against indirect fire. "Mount up," Ellis ordered, pulling his men together. They couldn't hold the windmill. It was too exposed now. A beacon for artillery. Grabbing the captured Mausers and extra ammo, 7. 92mm rounds that fit their own rifles in a pinch, they slipped out the back, into the ditches that snaked toward Oosterbeek. The crawl resumed, elbows and knees pumping through the slurry, the cold seeping deeper as the sun climbed weakly. Davies flanked Ellis, his Piat projector dragging like an anchor, while Wilkins covered the rear, his eyes scanning for ripples that might betray a German patrol. The world narrowed to sensation, the suck of mud releasing a boot, the sting of rain-laced wind on exposed cheeks, the faint crackle of a distant bren suppressing a tree-lined nest. Half a mile in, the ambush hit. Not snipers, but a roving SS patrol, 6 men in black fatigues, armed with MP-40 submachine guns and a single MG-42 on bipod. They'd been herding stragglers, using the mud's hindrance against the airborne troops, but the Allies' trick turned it. The Germans splashed boldly along a raised dike, silhouettes against the skyline, oblivious to the low forms in the water. Ellis signaled halt, the squad freezing mid-wallow, breaths held as the patrol passed 30 yards off. One SS man paused, lighting a cigarette, the match flare a deadly giveaway. Wilkins's borrowed 98K barked once, the scoped shot dropping the smoker with a splash. The others spun, spraying bursts into the empty dike, their 9mm rounds churning foam. The squad exploited it, rising like spectres from the muck, Sten guns chattering in short, vicious bursts. Davies's Piat whooshed, the anti-tank projectile slamming into the MG-42 nest, the explosion hurling the gunner backward in a spray of limbs and twisted metal. The SS men faltered, boots slipping in the deep, their vaunted discipline crumbling as they sank, weapons mired. Hand-to-hand ensued in the shallows. Ellis grappled one, the German's knife glancing off his helmet as he drove a knee into the man's gut, finishing with a Sten butt to the skull. Wilkins bayoneted another, the Lee Enfield's blade sinking home with a wet thunk. Within minutes the patrol lay still, their bodies bloating in the flood. Papers in their pockets, orders for a pincer on the perimeter, now sodden prizes. Panting, Ellis rifled the corpses, finding a field radio and Luger pistols, but more importantly, confirmation. The snipers were being pulled back, redeployed to higher ground with spotter aircraft, a Fieseler Storch liaison plane scouting from above. The mud trick had blunted their edge, forcing the Germans to rethink, but it invited escalation. As the squad pressed on, linking with a larger force at a crossroads near the rail bridge, the rumble intensified. Panzer Fies, their 75mm KWK guns swiveling, grinding forward with infantry screens. The airborne perimeter contracted, men whispering the ploy from unit to unit. 4th Parachute Brigade, adopting it for night raids. Even the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade smearing up despite the language barrier. By noon, under a sky threatening more rain, Ellis's group reached a forward outpost, a cluster of foxholes ringed by anti-tank guns from the 2nd Air Landing Anti-Tank Battery. The gunners, their 17-pounders crusted with dirt, cheered hoarsely at the sight of reinforcements. But the horizon darkened, not with clouds, but dust and smoke. A Panzer Aus rolled into view, its turret traversing, while snipers redeployed on its flanks, scopes glinting. The mud had bought time, neutralized the ghosts, but the iron tide rose, and the bridge's fate hung by a thread. Ellis dropped into a hole, scooping fresh sludge, readying for the next crawl, deeper into the storm, where one slip could drown them all. The sun hung low and indifferent over the polders, its light fracturing through the thickening clouds, as Sergeant Tom Ellis hunkered in the foxhole, the fresh mud cool and cloying between his fingers. He slathered it across his neck, the gritty paste sealing out the chill wind that whipped across the open ground, carrying the sharp tang of diesel exhaust and cordite. Around him, the outpost buzzed with strained urgency. Gunners from the 2nd Air Landing Anti-Tank Battery swabbing their 17-pounder ordnance QF guns, the long barrels crusted with the same relentless filth that coated everything. Private Wilkins spat a glob of muck from his mouth, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the Panzer IV loomed, its Maybach engine growling like a beast rousing from slumber, treads flinging arcs of slurry into the air. You could feel the ground tremble faintly through the damp earth, a vibration that set teeth on edge as the tank halted 400 yards out, its turret slewing left with a mechanical whine. Flanking it, snipers from the Hermann Goering division crept forward in pairs, their scoped Karabiner 98Ks held low, using the panzer's bulk as cover. These weren't the isolated ghosts of the windmill. They moved with armored support, spotters whispering coordinates via field phones strung along the half-tracks trailing behind. The mud had forced their hand, no more lofty perches, but integration into the mechanized push. Their ZF-39 optics now trained on the outpost's telltale puffs of smoke from cooking fires or hasty movements. "Down, all of you!" Ellis hissed, his voice cutting through the low chatter like a knife. The squad dropped, blending into their holes, the mud trick evolving on the fly. No longer just a crawl, now it was stillness, absolute and deceptive. Faces pressed to the slurry until breaths came in shallow sips. Corporal Davies gripped his Piat projector tighter, the tube's weight digging into his shoulder, while Lieutenant Hargreaves relayed orders via runner to the adjacent positions. Spread the word, become the bog, let the iron come to you. The borderers' foxholes, ringed by sangars of sandbags and glider wreckage, fell silent. Only the drip of water from helmet brims breaking the hush. The Panzer's 75mm Kamikaze 40 cannon barked first, the shell whistling overhead to slam into a distant barn, erupting in a fireball that lit the mist like a false dawn. Shrapnel rained down, pinging off metal and thudding into the soft ground, but the outpost held. The snipers followed, deliberate cracks echoing as they picked their shots. One round grazed a gunner's helmet, spinning him back with a curse, blood mixing with the mud on his brow. From his scope, the lead sniper, a gaunt veteran with an iron cross pinned to his tunic, scanned methodically, cursing the flat light that turned every lump suspicious. "Schmutz, überall," he muttered to his partner, the mud's uniformity frustrating their precision, hiding the Allies in plain sight. Ellis peered through a sliver in the foxhole lip, binoculars fogged but revealing the Germans' advance. Infantry dismounting from the half-tracks, MP40s at the ready, probing with bayonets extended. The tank lurched forward again, its tracks pulverizing the dike, sending waves rippling across the flooded pastures. But the quagmire fought back. The Panzer bogged at the halfway mark, front sprockets sinking into a hidden depression, engine revving futilely as it belched black smoke. The crew bailed, scrambling onto firmer ground, but the mud clung, slowing them like tar. It was the trick's unintended gift. What crippled Allied mobility now ensnared the Panzers, turning the fields into a vast, sucking trap. "Now!" Ellis roared, surging up as the tank stalled. The outpost erupted, 17-pounders thundering in unison, their AP shells streaking low to punch through the Panzer's glacis plate with hollow crumps. The turret hatch flew open, flames licking out as the ammunition cooked off in secondary blasts, the explosion hurling the commander skyward in a ragdoll arc. Snipers fired back wildly, their positions exposed without the armor's shadow, but the mudmen struck first. Wilkins, prone in the slurry, squeezed off a shot from the captured 98K, the rifle's bolt slick but sure, dropping a sniper mid-stride, his body splashing face first into the flood. The Germans faltered, their probe dissolving into chaos. Infantry splashed forward, knee-deep in the muck. But the Allies rose like vengeful earth, Sten guns and Brens chattering from concealed angles, bullets zipping through the mist to find flesh. Davies fired the Piat, the bomb arcing true to engulf a half-track in fire, its MG-42 falling silent as the crew roasted inside. Hand grenades sailed from the foxholes, Mills bombs and captured steel hand granates bursting in geysers that blinded and bowled over the SS men. One German, panic in his eyes, dropped his weapon to claw at the mud sucking his legs, only for Hargreaves to finish him with a bayonet thrust, the blade grating on bone. In the melee, the sniper's advantage evaporated. Cut off from their supports, they became targets themselves. Crawling to regroup, but the mud betrayed them, scopes fogging, barrels clogging with grit. Ellis charged a lone marksman hunkered behind a wrecked Kubelwagen, the German snapping off a shot that burned across Ellis's arm, tearing fabric but missing meat. Adrenaline surged. Ellis tackled him into the shallows, fists and mud flying in a brutal tangle. The sniper's knife flashed, slicing shallow across Ellis's cheek, but the sergeant drove his helmet edge into the man's temple, the impact stunning him long enough for a Sten burst to end it. Blood welled hot, but Ellis ignored it, rolling clear as another shell from a trailing Stu-G3 howitzer cratered nearby, the blast wave knocking him flat. By mid-afternoon, the assault broke. Wreckage littered the fields. The Panzer, a gutted hulk, half-tracks overturned like beached whales, bodies half-submerged, their black uniforms fading into the brown. The outpost tallied 2 wounded, no dead. The mud had shielded them, neutralizing 20 snipers and stalling the counter-push. Runners spread the tail. The trick saved the rail bridge sector, allowing supplies to trickle in via Dakota drops that evaded the Luftwaffe's thin patrols. Even the Poles, linking up from their drop zones, adopted it. Lieutenant Stefan Kowalski's paratroopers, their Bofors 40mm guns mired, smeared up and crawled to suppress a MG-42 nest, their number 36 grenades turning the tide. But exhaustion clawed deep. Ellis bandaged his arm with a strip from a dead German's shirt, the wound throbbing in rhythm with his pulse. Radio chatter painted a grim canvas, the main road bridge held by a thread. Frost's 2nd Battalion battered, XXX Corps still bogged south at Nijmegen. The mudploy spread like wildfire, whispers in the perimeter lines, from Oosterbeek to the Hartenstein Hotel HQ. But the Germans learned, deploying flamethrower teams in rubberized suits to flush the Dreckkrieger from their hides. Smoke canisters hissed in the distance, acrid plumes rising as patrols tested the flanks. As evening fell, the rain returned in sheets, turning the victory hollow. Ellis led his squad back to consolidate, the weight of weapons and weariness pulling at them. The bridge flickered in the gloom, a beacon under siege. But the mud's secret had brought another day, snipers reduced to footnotes, their terror blunted by ingenuity born of desperation. Yet from the east, heavier shadows gathered, Tiger tanks rumbling to life, their 80mm guns promising oblivion. The perimeter shrank, but the fight endured, one filthy step closer to holding or hell. The rain hammered down like divine judgment, turning the shrinking perimeter around Oosterbeek into a churning sea of brown despair. Sergeant Tom Ellis trudged through the knee-deep slurry, his boots long since surrendered to the mud's relentless pull, each step a sucking protest that echoed the ache in his bandaged arm. It was September 25th, 1944, Day 9 of Operation Market Garden, and the British 1st Airborne Division clung to life by threads frayed to breaking. The Hartenstein Hotel, now a makeshift HQ and aid station, loomed ahead through the downpour, its white walls stained with soot and blood, windows shattered by near misses from German 105mm howitzers. You could smell it before you saw it, the sour reek of unwashed bodies, gangrenous wounds, and the ever-present cordite that never quite washed away. Ellis's squad, down to 4 now, Wilkins nursing a shrapnel graze, Davies limping from a twisted ankle, merged with a ragged column of paratroopers from the 10th Battalion, their red berets' sodden caps pulled low. Faces gaunt, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, they whispered the mud trick like a talisman. "Smear and stay low, lads. Fritz's scopes can't touch ghosts." It had spread like an underground river, from the windmill raid to the rail bridge holds, even reaching the Poles under Brigadier Stanislaw Sosabowski, who smeared their khaki with the same grim resolve. Captain Reynolds's glider pilots had refined it, using captured German camouflage nets dipped in muck to drape over Piat teams, vanishing entire anti-tank positions into the polders. Snipers, those once untouchable phantoms from the 9th SS and Hermann Goering units, found their kill tallies slashed. Reports from battalion intelligence pegged a 60% drop in their effectiveness over the week, the mud turning precision into guesswork, but adaptation cut both ways. Inside the Hartenstein's crowded corridors, Ellis reported to Major Robert Kane, the wiry officer from the 2nd South Staffordshires, whose DSO would come from feats like this hell. Kane's uniform hung loose, his Sten gun propped against a table piled with maps and morphine syrettes. "Your tricks saved more hides than a dozen typhoons," Kane said, voice gravelly from shouting over the barrage. "Frost's boys at the bridge swear by it. Crawled right under a sniper's nest to plant charges, but the Tigers are rolling now. Mud or no, those 88s don't care about camouflage." Outside, the ground shook as a Tiger whose Maybach engine roared closer, its interleaved wheels grinding through the softer patches where lesser tanks had failed. The beast's turret traversed with a hydraulic sigh, the long KWK-36 gun probing the tree lines, while dismounted snipers, now bundled in ponchos, faces blackened with their own crude mud, flanked it, MP40s slung for close work. Ellis nodded, sinking onto a bench beside Jenkins, who lay pale on a stretcher, his shoulder swathed in bandages that wept yellow pus. The kid from Manchester managed a weak grin. "Heard you bagged a whole patrol, Sarge. Wish I could have crawled with you." Ellis clapped his good shoulder gently, the gesture heavy with unspoken losses. O'Leary's blank stare. Hargreaves cut down yesterday by mortar shrapnel during a supply run. The mud had blunted the snipers. Yes, patrols now moved in smeared waves, low and silent, turning the fields into ambush galleries. A squad from the 7th King Zone had used it to infiltrate a German CP near Driel, slitting throats and spiking an 81mm mortar before slipping away. Even the divisional reconnaissance unit, the recce jeeps bogged beyond salvage, adopted it on foot, their number 4 rifles picking off spotters who dared elevate, yet the tide inexorably turned. As night fell, the perimeter contracted under relentless pressure. The 10th SS Panzer Division's Frundsberg troops, reinforced by Kampfgruppen, scraped from the eastern front, hammered from 3 sides. Nebelwerfer rockets screamed in, their screaming mimes whistling like banshees before cratering the earth, flinging mud and men skyward. Ellis's group held a forward-slit trench, the walls collapsing hourly, forcing constant digs with entrenching tools that bent like spoons. "Hold fire till they're in the muck," Ellis ordered, his voice barely audible over the storm. The squad hunkered, weapons caked. Stens, Brens, a pilfered MG42 from the windmill, weights stretching into eternities broken by the crack of scoped Mausers. One shot whispered past, thudding into the rear lip. Another found a borderer 50 yards off, his mud-smeared helmet spinning away to reveal a ruined face. The Germans had countered cleverly. Flamethrower squads in asbestos suits waded the ditches, their Flammenwerfer 35 packs hissing gouts of flame that boiled the water and scorched hides. Smoke grenades followed, choking the air with oily black clouds that forced the crawlers upright, into the snipers' sights. Ellis felt the shift in a dawn patrol, rising to counter a probe, only to draw fire from a new breed. Snipers mounted on half-tracks, elevated just enough to peer over the flood, their ZF-39s sweeping in teams. One burst from a concealed Bren suppressed them, but the cost mounted. Wilkins took a round through the thigh, his scream muffled as Davies dragged him back. The mud turning traitor by slowing the retreat. By September 25's end, the noose tightened. Radio pleas crackled from XXX Corps, still stalled at Nijmegen, their Shermans mired, the bridge lost to counterattacks. Urquhart's division, reduced to 2-0 effectives from 10-0s, formed a tight hedgehog around the Hartenstein. Ellis's men fought in shifts, the mud trick their last redoubt. During a night infiltration, they crawled to sabotage a Tiger's tracks, satchel charges blooming orange against the behemoth's side, crippling it for hours. Snipers claimed fewer now, frustrated by the vanishing targets, but the attrition ground on. artillery, panzers, even Stuka dives when the weather cleared briefly. Evacuation came at last, a desperate Rhine crossing under covering fire. Ellis ferried across in a canvas boat from the Royal Navy's assault units, the current icy and unforgiving, German tracers zipping like fireflies. Jenkins didn't make it. Sepsis took him in the hotel's overrun ward. Of the squad, only Ellis and Davies survived the far bank, collapsing amid the 400 who escaped. The rest, 500 brothers, left to POW camps or graves in the polders. The operation failed. Arnhem's bridge unheld, but in after-action reports, the stupid mud trick earned quiet nods. It neutralized the sniper plague, saving perhaps hundreds in those hellish days, a low-tech riposte to elite marksmanship. Years later, in a quiet pub near Aldershot, Ellis would raise a pint to the muck, that unassuming ally in the war's brutal arithmetic. The ghosts of Arnhem lingered, but the mud had made some of them ours.